Russia hit Turkey's Turkish ship in Ukraine. On December 12th, Russia launched a comprehensive and destructive retaliatory operation in the Black Sea. The targets were Ukraine's last two remaining ports, which are its commercial lifeline and the logistics route supplying these ports. Look at the drone. It's going to explode. However, once the smoke cleared, it became apparent that this operation was less a military success and more a diplomatic disaster and strategic blind spot. Russian missiles and drones struck 3 Turkish ships anchored in the port. It blew up the ship. The ship engulfed in flames, and the footage was the Cenktrol vessel owned by the Turkish logistics company Cenk Shipping. They hit the ship. They hit the ship. The ship is burning. Get out. Get out. Set up. And the timing of the attack was very significant and dangerous. The attack on the Turkish ships took place at the very moment Putin was shaking hands with Erdogan in Ashgabat, sending messages of cooperation. At first glance, Russia's move was marketed as a response to Ukraine's attacks on Moscow. However, the reality on the ground tells a very different story. The Cenk T ship that was hit was not carrying military ammunition, tanks, or armored vehicles, but generators that were vital for Ukraine's electricity grid, which had collapsed due to winter conditions. More importantly, the weapon used in the attack was not a blind artillery strike. It was a GPS and INSG guided Jiran-2 Shahed 136 drone. This technology means that the coordinates were entered in advance and the target was deliberately selected hours before the flight. In other words, while Putin was meeting with Erdogan in Ashgabat, Russian drones were locked onto Turkish ships carrying humanitarian aid. Another piece of evidence proving that the incident was planned is the ship's digital footprint. Gen T had turned off its AI's automatic identification system signal on December 11th to conceal its visit to the Ukrainian port. Russian intelligence tracked the ship despite it being in stealth mode, detected it docking at the port, and struck it at its most vulnerable moment. Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Kula confirmed that the attack directly targeted civilian logistics. However, the fact that the 3 ships damaged in Ukrainian ports that day happened to be Turkish-owned set off alarm bells in Ankara. Statistically, it is nearly impossible for a random attack to strike only Turkish ships in the middle of the day. And on Saturday, December 13th, the Ukrainian Navy accused Russia of deliberately attacking another Turkish ship with an unmanned aerial vehicle. The Viva ship was carrying sunflower oil to Egypt. In addition to the crew, there were 11 Turkish citizens on board. According to the Ukrainian Navy, the attack took place in open waters within Ukraine's exclusive economic zone and outside the range of Ukraine's air defense systems. This attack also proves that Friday's attack was not a coincidence. Likewise, there are no coincidences in diplomacy, only well-collated timing. At the time of the attack, Putin and Erdogan were in Ashgabat, gathered for the International Peace and Security Forum, posing warmly for the cameras. The irony began with the name of the summit itself. President Erdogan met with Putin and discussed reducing tensions in the Black Sea, reviving the grain corridor, and the safety of civilian ships. While Erdogan was clearly telling Putin, don't attack Ukrainian ports and energy infrastructure, smoke rising from Turkish ships in Ukrainian ports. This situation, beyond diplomatic courtesy, was either an open attack on a strategic partnership or a miraculously coincidental event. The situation was so chaotic that a bizarre crisis even unfolded with Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif being kept waiting for 40 minutes to meet with Putin, only to be unexpectedly included in the Erdogan-Putin meeting. That strange seating arrangement in the photos, these images summed up Russia's view of its allies. It was clear that Putin had set aside diplomatic protocol and courtesy and was in a tense and distracted mood. What Putin thought was a show of strength put Turkey in a difficult dilemma. However, neither option in this dilemma would be pleasant for Putin. It was in this atmosphere that the news of the attack came, creating a shockwave effect in the corridors of Ankara. In a message released after the attack, the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs emphasized the need to suspend attacks on energy and port infrastructure. In diplomatic language, this was the most polite way of saying, you are testing our patience. The ship catching fire is not just a deck fire. It is a spark that will fundamentally fundamentally change the risk perception at London Lloyd's and insurance desks in Istanbul. The fundamental rule of the maritime economy is this: if there is no trust, trade stops. This attack inevitably triggered an upward shift in the war risk premium in the Black Sea as dictated by market dynamics. Putin's move in Odessa could be seen as a military engagement. However, on the strategy table, this event carries the risk of a fatal mistake for the Russian economy because Moscow has forgotten that the Black Sea is not just a body of water for it, but Russia's economic lung. And the Turkish Straits, the windpipe of that lung, are currently under the sovereignty of Ankara, Turkey, which they are targeting with missiles and burning ships. First, let's clarify the magnitude of the money and risk on the table. Having lost the European market after Western sanctions, Russia transports a significant portion, estimated to be in the 20 to 25% range of its crude oil and petroleum products to the Asian market via the Black Sea, meaning it must pass through the Turkish Straits. With the Baltic Sea frozen in winter, the Black Sea is Russia's only warm and open exit route. Millions of barrels of oil pass through this route every day. By striking the Turkish ship, Putin actually took the risk of turning the route used by tankers carrying his own oil into a conflict zone. If the safety of civilian ships in the Black Sea is completely eliminated, Russia, which relies on this route for billions of dollars in oil exports, will suffer as much as Ukraine, which is waiting for generators. The second and most critical layer, the shadow fleet. This fleet, consisting of old tankers with complex ownership structures that Russia uses to circumvent the price cap, has always been a risk for the Straits. Until now, Turkey has not intervened in transit in accordance with the principle of freedom of trade and the mantra balances. Anchor tolerated these environmental risks within a certain framework in order to manage regional tensions. However, the shooting of the Turkish ship on December 12th is a development that will call this policy of tolerance into question because the equation is changing. When Russia becomes a threat to Turkish ships, Turkey's right to consider Russian-linked ships passing through its territorial waters and the Bosphorus Strait as a potential security risk can be legitimately grounded in international law and reciprocity principles. So, will Turkey close the straits? Turkey does not need to declare war to do this. The Montreux Convention and local regulations grant Turkey control powers on the grounds of life, property, and environmental safety. A potential scenario that Turkey could bring to the table is silent but effective bureaucratic control. Turkey could increase the protocols and frequency of inspections for passage through the straits, citing increased navigation safety risks in the Black Sea following the Odessa attack. Turkey could demand much more comprehensive and verifiable insurance guarantees, P&I from tankers passing through the straits against potential accidents. The difficulty of shadow fleet vessels in providing such high standard insurance would mean a natural decrease or halt in transits. Longer inspections of suspicious or under-documented vessels off Istanbul could create a halted effect, slowing Russia's logistics and increasing its costs. Furthermore, in an environment where Ukraine views the shadow fleet as a legitimate target, Turkey's stance will be decisive. Russia's attack on a Turkish civilian vessel could strain Ankar's neutrality balance. Any response Turkey gives to Russia's aggressive stance through diplomatic or bureaucratic channels will complicate Russian tanker traffic in the Black Sea. The real nightmare for Russia is not clashing with the Turkish Navy, but getting stuck in the wheels of Turkish bureaucracy. With this move, Russia is effectively labeling the Black Sea as a high-risk zone, threatening not only logistics to Ukraine, but also the operational costs of ships carrying oil and grain from its own ports, such as Novorossiysk. Because the maritime ecosystem is interconnected. If civilian ships are burning in one basin, alarm bells ring for all trade in that basin. If a ship owner is afraid to send their vessel to Odessa, they will think twice about sending it to a Russian port on the other side of the same sea. So while Putin seeks to strangle Ukraine, he is turning the Black Sea into a psychological minefield for commercial vessels. And the risk of these mines blowing up the costs of his own export vessels is increasing day by day. For ship owners and operators, entering Ukrainian ports is no longer a commercial risk. It has become financial suicide. Insurance companies have reached the point of freezing policies or raising premiums to 5 to 10% of the ship's value, saying if Russia is even hitting Turkish-owned ships, no one is safe. By turning the Black Sea into an uninsurable zone, Russia has not only cut off aid to Ukraine, it has also scared off ships carrying oil and grain from its own ports, such as Novorossiysk. Because the maritime ecosystem is interconnected, if a ship burns in one port, premiums skyrocket across the entire sea. If a ship owner won't send their vessel to Odessa, they'll also hesitate to send it to a Russian port on the other side of the same sea. While Putin sought to strangle Ukraine, he turned the Black Sea into a minefield for commercial vessels. And these mines are now poised to explode under his own export ships. And the most critical logistical breaking point, the position of the Turkish merchant fleet. After November 28th, some of the region's largest logistics players suspended or slowed down their operations due to increased security risks. Now, the targeting of ships belonging to active players in the field, such as Genk shipping, is a breaking point that could exhaust the sector's wait-and-see patience. The strongest scenario on the table is the possibility that the Turkish merchant fleet will gradually withdraw from the Ukrainian route and the risky northern Black Sea route, or minimize voyages by updating its risk analyses after this attack. Russia believes it has isolated Ukraine by sea, strangling it with a strangulation tactic. However, it overlooks a massive reality. A significant portion of the tankers and logistics networks transporting Russian crude oil and products to world markets are controlled by Greek and Turkish-owned or operated companies. When a Turkish ship owner vessel is hit, it sets a deterrent precedent for other ship owners. The collapse of a logistics bridge due to loss of confidence, just as leaving tanks on the front line without fuel halts and offensive, has the potential to reduce Russia's export capacity and leave Moscow without foreign currency by withdrawing civilian fleets from the region. This is a domino effect, and it is clear that the first stone has fallen at the Odessa docks. Putin may have thought he was flexing his muscles by striking a ship belonging to the country whose leader he shook hands with in Ashgabat, but in reality, he has placed the jugular vein of his own economy under Turkey's scalpel. This move is the biggest blunder Russia has made in the diplomatic chess column. Turkey no longer needs to fire a single bullet to stop Russia. A single signature is enough. A single amendment to the Straits Convention, a single decree could wipe billions of dollars from Russia's budget every month. The Turkish ship burning in Odessa may have been extinguished, but that fire has now spread to Ankara, threatening to burn Russia's oil revenues, and Ankara will not rush to extinguish this fire. Putin's promise of security has now turned into panic, a spiral of chaos, unable to protect even its own trade routes. Instead, striking the ships of countries it considers allies. Logistical suffocation is no longer a theory, but a valve in Turkey's hands. Moscow tried to force this valve open, but all it did was turn the power holding the valve against itself. When you see Russian tankers waiting in the Bosphorus in the coming days, remember that they are not just waiting their turn to pass, but are actually waiting in line for the Kremlin's economic collapse. Because the missile fired that night may have sunk a ship, but it also wiped out Russia's future in the Black Sea. The war is no longer just on the front lines. It's in insurance policies, straight passage logs, and inside oil barrels. And on this front, Russia is defenseless. So what are your thoughts on this? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on new videos, please subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to turn on notifications. Thank you for choosing